I watched a cute little video of you talking about your D-Minder app.
Oh, wow.
It's probably a few years old.
Quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
noticed that the year I wrote that app is the same year that you wrote the article about D and sleep.
So 2012?
Yes.
Damn, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And interestingly, I went to Perplexity today and I asked it, why has all the sleep literature since then just ignored vitamin D? And
What did it say?
it said, you're right, it has. Matthew Walker's book, which basically made him, doesn't mention it. Um, it mentioned three or four other books. I was going to go back and ask it about the influencers. I watched the Huberman episode on sleep. It seemed like it went on for a week, but I don't remember him mentioning D either.
No. In fact, they the big influencers appear to avoid talking about it because so I just this year I went to the sleep meetings in early June and I went to the vitamin D workshop in late June, which is the first time I've actually gone to I think I first went to the vitamin D workshop in 2017. And I haven't been back since. The thing that was striking about both of those meetings was the sleep meetings were dominated by amazing amounts of people who are going to make money from helping you sleep with their mattresses and their pillows and the sleep measurements and the little all the all the stuff to measure your sleep while you're sleeping. I mean, there were so many people that were selling shit that they had to like enlarge the area where so they have a lot of money. I mean, they're contributing a lot of money to the sleep meetings, which is not bad, but none of those are really about why is sleep so terrible. And the coolest thing about the meeting was, and you stop me if this is not interesting to you because I'm not exactly sure what you're interested in. Obviously you're interested in D, and I'm thrilled that you are, and we could talk about I definitely know about the D-Minder app. The coolest thing was our plenary session this year, which is always starts the meeting, and it's some really well-respected sleep researcher, was by a guy named Jerry Siegel, who I really went to this meeting because I wanted to hear his full name is Jerome Siegel, and he's at I believe UCLA. I always get confused if he's at UCLA or USC, but he has been doing research in sleep, I think, since the 1960s, pretty
Wow.
parallel to Dement, who started the sleep study lab in the 70s at Stanford. And he's, I think, he started in Brooklyn. So somehow he moved across. At any rate, he is someone who was brave enough to really debunk a bunch of myths. He spent 40 minutes of the hour that he had saying things that were just amazing, like, I just want to say that sleep depriving normal people and then seeing what happens to them is not the same as someone who has a sleep disorder. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is like speaking truth to power. So he did multiple things of that. Like he said, oh, this author is saying we do two sleeps. And he said, as far as I can tell, he's just made that up. I have never seen anybody do two sleeps, humans or animals. And this guy has studied at least 20 different animals. Like he has all these studies that he did in platypus, in echidnas in Australia. They actually went around and did a lot of the actual sleep recordings in hunter-gatherers in three different places, two different places in Africa and one in South America, and did their temperature measurements at the same time in this unique way, which was to swallow a tablet so you wouldn't have to go and run in there and figure out what their temperature is and wake them up. And he spent the time saying, I want you to think about what these comments that we've made that humans have X amount of REM sleep because our brains are bigger and we're smarter. I said, there is absolutely no proof of that. In fact, the platypus sleeps REM sleep 8 hours a night.
Wow.
So, and each one of these were things that said, his ultimate comment was, we have made up these stories about what these recordings of things should mean, but that doesn't mean we're right. And he said, I want, in various ways, said, I think REM sleep is when we're warming up the brain again. Says nobody pays attention to that, but there are times when our body is not regulating our temperature, when the hypothalamus turns off for a while and our temperature slowly goes down. And then our temperature goes up again. And the one thing I can show you on a linear recording where it's actually recorded is during REM sleep, the body is warming up again. And so he really the thing that I thought was so good about it is he tried to debunk most of the things that we have just taken for granted, and that Matthew Walker has written a book about. And it's not that he's wrong or that Jerry Siegel is right. It's that most of the time when we try to put our literature together, one of the things I liked about that video that you had was that you kind of come across as, I just want people to be interested in this, interested in going outside. That's the final message that so the fascinating part to me was that, and then he came up with some really fascinating, Jerry Siegel did at the end of his lecture, that was basic science and really, really cool. Ultimately, your first comment that nobody's paying attention to D and sleep is profoundly bizarre to me still. Okay. So then I go from those sleep meetings where nobody's talking about the biochemistry of sleep, and not just D, but that the D's effect on the microbiome means that these other cofactors, and the fact that we clearly have acetylcholine deficiency, the thing that intrigued you about. And I assume that that was Stephen Park. You said Dr. Stephen.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a really sharp dude, really smart guy, I think. Um,
Yeah, I really liked that video a lot. And as I said in my note to you, the thing that was most appealing was it wasn't the typical, go buy a new mattress and you're going to sleep like a
yeah,
dream.
yeah, or
It's a chain of things. And I've gone down the rabbit hole on sleep, and I've gone down the rabbit hole multiple times on choline. And I was working on some software that I was calling a sufficiency calculator, because when you watch popularizers like Dr. Greger and some of the other YouTubers, it's shocking how basic nutrients nobody's getting to sufficiency. So he has a video where he says potassium, it's 2% of the population gets to the RDA per day. Um, Fiber, it's ridiculously low. Of course, we know vitamin D is very low number of people getting to sufficiency, but choline is one of those ones where I just am baffled how anybody is going to end up being sufficient choline from their diet. I just think the people who are saying that it's easy don't know how to do math. I get frustrated when I see people saying choline, well, you have to eat your eggs. What? Okay, so I'm going to eat 3 eggs a day every day just for choline. That sounds like a really bad idea. And then the other thing that's crazy about choline is Greger in particular is very anti-egg. He's made tons of videos about eggs.
why doesn't he like eggs?
Well, his main reasons are, see, this is also another theme that I thought I wanted to get your take on is I think we're all drowning in information and there's very little knowledge. And this whole thing we're talking about is a good example of it. There's study data out there on D and sleep. How can these people not include this in these books? But it's like I watched a lot of Greger videos, and one time I went to his site and I did a search on eggs, and the results came back. There's 76 videos, and I did the math. If you watched them, it would take you a week. So there's no one place where you can go on his site and find his beef list on eggs. But my impression was, just from my memories, was he seemed to be pretty obsessed with the relationship between eggs and TMAO. Now, that's quite controversial because
What
later
is TMAO?
it's a compound that's made in the gut, trimethyl oxide. I can't remember the exact, but it's a compound made in the gut when choline makes its way to, I believe it's made in the colon. So the problem with it is that if you get an overgrowth of it in the colon, it kills good bacteria. It's toxic to the good bacteria. Now, this is one of the other things that you hear a lot when you have, things saying good or bad.
Yeah.
The reality is, if you have a really well-balanced diet and you eat a lot of fiber and a lot of green stuff, then you can eat and things that might otherwise cause TMAO, and
Hmm.
it will not cause TMAO. But even more complicating in that picture is Cleveland Clinic did a study and said eggs did not raise TMAO. And they also showed that supplementing choline did. Now it gets yet more complex. The supplement was the bipartite one, not there's three different choline supplements you can take. And wait, the B
By
one is,
choline bitartrate.
yeah, bitartrate. That was the one they said did raise TMAO. And then the phosphatidylcholine, this one doesn't. But this one is considered really more for I don't know why the camera's not focusing, but this one's considered more for like liver health and brain health.
And the
And
thing
that
that's confusing about this, in my view, most of the time, is none of the studies have been done in the setting about any of these experiments that we do in the normal public today, having determined whether they have lost their microbiome, if they have a normal microbiome or not.
I
So if
totally agree.
so, what are we, how are we to make conclusions about anything from the studies when I think the blood levels that we draw, I don't know about the blood levels of choline, but I'm pretty sure that most of the B vitamins and most of the minerals, the blood levels are pretty worthless. The cellular levels that they use and charge a bunch of money for are from white blood cells. They have nothing to do with the brain levels of
That
anything.
was one of the things I was going to mention is any, so, one of the most mind-blowing nutritional studies I've seen so far this year was the one that came out and said something I had suspected for a long time. Oh, it looks like the Japanese were right. 300 sufficiency for B12 is wrong.
Yes,
Now we have a large data set. They had
yes,
always said sufficiency was 600. Now we have people who were between 300 and 600 and their brain shrank.
yeah,
Well, there's nothing else to talk about there.
yeah.
We don't need, but like as you're saying, the B12 tests, they're largely useless. You're getting your B12 level checked. Um, but we don't have things like that for choline. And where would those tests be? Because choline in the brain and choline in the liver are two completely different things. Um, but it's hard to imagine how anybody would have achieved sufficiency. Like, let's assume that eggs are great. At what point in human history was every member of the household getting 3 eggs a day? Never is the correct answer to that. If you just look at like food history in a country like Italy, an egg was like a piece of gold. They would save a couple of them for Sunday supper, maybe.
And
They weren't,
where do guinea pigs get their choline?
what did what?
Where do guinea pigs get their choline?
Wait, where did who get choline?
Guinea pigs. So the things that they never talk about are if all mammals have the same biochemical mix, my guinea pigs need to be able to make acetylcholine, to make their gut work, to make everything work in the autonomic nervous system. They don't need eggs. So there are these assumptions that one of the cool things about that Jerry Siegel stuff is if you look at it evolutionarily, one of the things that he did, and I'm going to come back to what you said about choline, but one of the things he said in terms of sleep was he grouped animals according to whether there were mammals that were monotremes, egg-laying mammals. So he had these studies that he did on Australia that on the echidna and on the platypus. And then he had other studies that he did on porpoises, on mammals in the water, uh, elephants, etc. Elephants sleep less than any other mammal, according to what he said. He's got all these articles on his website if you're interested in them. But the fascinating part was that very few people think about other species as having something to do with us, but sleep, autonomic nervous system, the general biochemistry of our body is identical in all these other animals. There are small changes, but in
Uh,
a general sense, nobody pays attention to that.
you know what? It's really interesting we're talking about this part because when I was reading about choline this morning, I was reading that the body makes it, but it can't make enough of it. So you have to get some of it from your diet. But isn't that also what happened in terms of evolution with vitamin D? Wasn't it theorized that at one point, um, basically earlier humanoids produced enough vitamin D, and then when the skin evolved the ability to make it, essentially the body started taking it from the environment instead.
I think what you stumbled into is the fact that as you said, we are drowning in information but very little knowledge because there are other articles that say vitamin D as a hormone actually started to show up in flowering plants. So that the first step was now I cannot find this article. Somebody referenced this in an article, so I haven't seen the original article. I might be able to find it, but that means that the first time that a plant, even before animals came, that a plant began to need to link to how much sun there was when there were two sexes. And that those two sexes then had to find each other, and therefore their fertility, that laying eggs or fertilizing the whatever the plant is going to use to reproduce, as soon as there's two sexes, there's an aspect where we have to get the sperm to the egg, and we are using in plants because they can't move, insects or other animals, etc. So it turns out that there's D3 that's in plants too. That
Wow.
it was that D2 came at the level of fungus, which is billions of years ago, and it doesn't look like any bacteria made D. And I'm probably going to turn out to be wrong there, but it looks like first came bacteria for billions of years, and then came fungus that made a chemical very similar to D3, D2 from sun exposure, and it could therefore manage how much of itself it would make. It could hibernate. It could go back down.
Right.
There's no sun, it can hibernate. Then you go to flowering plants. So the bizarre part is there are people who are writing about things in an evolutionary framework that see these things totally differently. And I really think that Walter Stumpf is the person who put this together immediately when he
Why
saw
hasn't he written a book?
none of his colleagues liked him. That was my major learning episode was to go to the Vitamin D Council workshop that was in New York in 2017. And the reason why I went was to see if I could ask some of the vitamin D big dogs who were going to be at the meeting why they did not take on Walter Stumpf's belief system around this, which makes the most sense to me.
That must have been when Cannell was still running it, right?
I don't know. No, Cannell, I haven't seen Cannell at those meetings. He might have been at that one. Um, and I haven't been able to see whether or not. So the vitamin D workshop is now run by another guy who's, I believe, is well, he might have just run this one, but I believe the guy running it is somewhere in the Midwest. And I think Cannell has kind of retired to some
Yeah,
extent. He must be
yeah,
pretty old by now, if he's
yeah.
still alive, which I think he is. But what happened to me while I was at that meeting was I talked to Bruce Hollis, who's someone I really respect. He and Carol Wagner are the two people who have actually studied prospectively in pregnant women, trying to keep the level at 40 and above. And so I would happen to be sitting next to him at one of the social events, which I absolutely hate to go to, but I really had, and I said, well, what's up with Walter Stump's belief system? Why does everybody have a different lens that they're looking through? And he said, Walter was an asshole. He would stand up at these meetings and he'd come to the microphone and he'd say, you guys really don't understand that I am the only person who really understands vitamin D, and you don't reference me enough in your articles. And I was like,
Of course.
and so the story there was his arrogance discouraged his colleagues from looking through his lens. Now, I don't think I don't think that's the only reason. This last meeting that I went to, it was shocking to me that almost every lecturer has a different lens. It's like those pictures of the elephant where the people, I'm touching the toenail of the elephant and I have one impression and somebody's touching the trunk or whatever. It was exactly like that. It was still like that.
That ties into a joke that I find myself bringing up all the time, which is of the three great psychologists from the early 20th century, Freud, Jung, and Adler, almost nobody knows who Adler was. But Adler's main thing was human beings are primarily motivated by fear of feelings of inferiority.
Mm.
The worst thing you can do is get up and immediately tell a bunch of people who've invested a ton of time into something that they missed something or that you got more out of it. They're going to immediately hate you.
And
Um,
that's profound. And it's the same as primates are very focused on status.
it's so true. I saw a great quote this past week where it was a philosophy quote where Nietzsche was saying the idea that we're interested in truth is utterly silly. We're basically interested in looking good and making sure that what we're saying maintains our status within that group that we're saying it to. Because we're not saying it to ourselves, we're saying it to a group. It's funny, the funny thing about this story too is that I attended this vitamin D conference in like 2015 or something down in La Jolla, and it was put on by
I would
the
expect a canal to be there. Was he there?
he was there, yeah.
Hmm.
And that was put on by the guys who are still around. They do like home testing and stuff. But anyway, but they had a mixer the night before, and I met this German guy who's been doing light research for decades, named Alexander Wunsch, and
How do
the
you
two of
spell
us
it?
got Wunsch, I think, and the two of us got talking for like an hour. So the next day I go to his talk. His talk starts, the first slide he brings up is here's the sun. It's been out in the sky for 4 billion years, and here's the light spectrum, and there's stacks of all kinds of rays coming out of it. Then he goes to the next slide and he goes, here's the human skin, one of the most complex organs in nature. That's also been evolving for millions of years. Wait, these two things have co-evolved. Then he goes to the third slide and there's a pill on it. And he goes, yeah, now this is gonna match this. Which at the time, that was before we even knew that going out in the sun made your body produce nitric oxide. But I just thought that right away. And one of the things we talked about the night before was, well, the number one killer of all time is tuberculosis. And, people were put out on Sundex and it checked the disease or stopped the disease. there's a new guy who's got a channel on YouTube named Med Cram. I'm sure you've seen him. His
No.
name's
MA.
Roger Seaholt, Seheult, I think.
No,
He
but
was just he was just on this podcast. That's quite a popular podcast called Diary of a CEO. His episode is pretty good, but one of the things I've gotten into a few arguments with him on Twitter because he's big on just there's so much benefit from light. Yes, that's true. So now but he also likes to say lots of things we were attributing to vitamin D is really just a marker for sunlight, which I think is complete silliness. Also, one of the things he did last week, the last time I got into a minor argument with him, was he put up this study and it was showing that vitamin D supplementation didn't make a difference, but putting people out in the sun did. And so I looked at the study. First thing I said to him was, haven't we given up on studies where they were too cheap or lazy to look at levels? They told the
yeah.
person to take
No,
a
we haven't
pill.
given up on them.
No, they're still the dominant form.
Yeah. And the thing that was most shocking was um, the vital study, which is the one that's really just been grossly used. They brought the gal, I think it's Manson, that was the primary author on the vital study in 1999, came out of the Mass General. So it's like, oh, it's at Boston, it's at Harvard, it must be good. 25,000 people enrolled. She was there, and she clearly does not understand that D is a hormone. And she's got an MD after her name. I thought she was a master's in public health. So I really cut her a lot of slack, thinking they've designed this study as though this is a public health issue. It's not a public health issue. They've designed it because they gave the vitamin word to it as though the government is going to put it as a supplement somewhere, or that you could really tell every single individual exactly what they needed when we don't really know. We know so little about the clinical side of this. So she was there and they had her do a lecture, and then they had her sit on a three-person panel, and her answers to the questions, she's not stupid, but she's completely uninformed about the fact that this is an endocrine problem, that this is an endocrine disease. And at the same time that they're talking about, well, we have to address the Endocrine Society's recent publication, what their recommendations are, which was also just like phenomenally stupid. Like, we don't have there, I don't know if, are you aware of the Endocrine Society's recent recommendation of what clinicians should do?
No, I find that I've had other things where I've run into
Yeah.
endocrine society
Oh
stuff and
God,
just
it's
been, I mean,
ridiculous.
after the debacle of defining pre-diabetes as 100 and how badly that went, I mean,
Yeah, it's a group of people. One, anybody who's like, you and I have similar ways of looking at the world, otherwise you wouldn't have contacted me. But anybody who wants to sit on a committee with about 20 other people, I would rather die than sit on a committee, because whatever they're finally going to say is going to be so dumbed down that it has no interest to me. So the final endocrine report from 2024 was, and they addressed all of these issues, including recognizing that fixed dose studies are worthless. So the final comment was right on target. Their final comment was, we do not have enough clinical reports of actually following humans, giving doses and following levels that are related to be able to recommend. So here's the recommendation. We
give
don't
us
recommend
money.
that doctors ever do D levels because we don't know what dose to recommend. It's
Of
like,
course not.
they're just going to bug us. They're going to do they're going to do this level, then they're going to call us up and they're going to ask us what's the dose, and we don't know. So it's better that they not do it. That was the
This
whole
is
summary.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, there's so many things to unpack in there. One of them is that every good YouTuber at some point drops the line, the poison is in the dose. But then they don't listen to themselves. They go back to acting like everybody can just do this one thing. No. First off, vitamin D is fat soluble. It will go into your blubber. So by the time you get to 30 BMI, you have to double the dose. So if
That's
you're
not
designing
correct,
a,
Rob. That is not
what?
correct.
No,
No, and I want you to think of it in a different way. It does go into your fat, and that's there was a guy that it at the there are two things happening there that are really interesting. There was a guy who I need to get in touch with that gave a lecture that I missed that was about measuring the amount of vitamin D in fat samples and exercise and the effect on that. Exercise has an effect on liberating D from the fat. Okay.
there was just a study about that 2 weeks ago.
Yes,
And
it
they
might
were
have been his
basically
study.
saying, yeah, during the blackout period, if you continue to exercise, some D does go into your bloodstream, which is
Okay.
amazing.
Yes. Now, the fascinating part about that is if you look through that evolutionary lens, let's say, when an animal has 3 months of no sun, let's just say, the big meteorite came and, there's no sun for 3 months.
That's
Who's going
where
to,
we survived that
yes, who's
exact
going to
thing.
survive? Okay. One,
Mammals.
the people who can live on D2, the animals that can live on D2 that comes in fungus that's still alive and has made D2, and you can find that if you eat it. So one, that would be an advantage. The second is the person who can sleep and drop their metabolic rate way down. And then you have to think about, well, how would the body then recognize when the time to hibernate has finished? When the sun comes out again. But the second thing that would be a big advantage is when the animal gets out of the black hole and starts to exercise. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Well, that would make perfect sense within that lens. There's a second thing that's weird about this idea that fat people need bigger doses. If you really go back and look at the studies, what you'll see is they have, like, when you really go and say, this is a fat person, and you try to get a linear model to say bigger doses, fatter people, and you try to make a linearity of it. If you look at their actual data, there are a bunch of people that are like down here and over here, and they draw a straight line. But what about this person who actually only needed 2,000 IUs and
Where,
was
where,
really, really fat?
where is that data? Because I got to, first off, I'm fascinated to hear that there's a different version of this. But
Yes,
when I
because it's
wrote the
not
app
true.
originally in 2012, there was no BMI factor in the app because nobody had any data. Nobody was
Yes,
talking about it at all.
yes,
Then it was no less than Dr. Hollick, who he and I had. I told him I put a BMI factor in the app because of this data set. And he said, good. He said he had seen multiple data sets
yeah.
and that,
I, I think it's wrong to assume that based on my own personal experience with 1,000 people in my clinical setting where I'm doing levels and giving doses. Okay. And my own experience was you cannot you cannot anticipate what dose they're going to need based on how fat they are. You can say that people, my view instead is the people who are grossly obese, and that is something that's happened really since the late 60s, based on ridiculous things like I just recently watched the Woodstock movie again. And if you watch that again and you watch who's sitting in the audience, you watch the whole movie, none of those people are fat. There's like 50,000 young people there, and there's nobody that's obese.
yeah.
Also, I just went to my 50th high school reunion. I mean, these are ridiculous things. You can't say that this is a prospective study. But I looked through my graduating yearbook, and there were two fat kids, there were two obese kids in 350 people in my graduating class. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, if you go back to the books that document, for instance, 1960s coming to a circus in South Oklahoma. I'm really focused on South Oklahoma because my husband grew up there. They would still had circuses that would come in late 50s, early 60s that would have
Sure.
a fat lady booth.
Yeah.
And people would pay a nickel when it was expensive to go see a fat lady. Okay.
There's a meme that literally ends up on Twitter every 3 or 4 days of the fat guy from like the circus in like 1890. And they're like, this guy, if he walks into a Sizzler, he's not even the 10th fattest guy.
Yeah. So that means that this is a recent event. Therefore,
By the way, have you seen or heard of this book?
no.
This is the former FDA guy, David Kessler.
You think it's good?
Well, I'm about halfway through it. Part of the reason why I mention it is the whole time he was fighting the tobacco companies, he was running around eating Sara Lee cheesecakes and ballooning up and down with his
Ah,
weight. And then he eventually injects himself with GLP-1 drugs. But this might actually hold a clue to exactly what you're talking about, which is, of course, in the section I just went through in the book, he said, not all fat is equal. Well, we've known that for a long time. The really deadly fat is the visceral fat.
mhm,
And that ends up just being a genetic lottery. You know,
mm,
some people are going to overeat and it's going to go to their thighs and their legs and their butt. And that's not going to produce the omentum and all the other
exactly.
stuff that encases the internal organs in fat
Mhm,
and harm. So that might be one hypothesis is that for apples and pears, the dosing would be different because for a pear, they're going to take a lot of vitamin D.
mm,
It's going to
mm.
end up there and it won't come back into circulation maybe as rapidly.
Okay, well, let me give you one other idea to think about it. This was my final conclusion, though. This is a hypothesis also. My patients, when I did D for 2 years, would tell me things like, I'm out walking at lunchtime. This is one gal in particular, like weighs 320. So she's 100 pounds overweight, and she's out walking at noon on her lunch break. And that was the year that it was 100 degrees every day for like 6 weeks here. And it would go down to like 95 at night. It was horrible. And she was out walking. One of the things that's really important about people in Texas is they, when they have low D, they also have no ability to control their internal temperature because their autonomic nervous system is screwed. Okay.
Wow.
So she did not lose weight. This was one thing. So I have all these clinical observations within a context of a neurologist who's been, being a neurologist for 30 years. She didn't lose any weight. So I had all these people who would, I didn't tell her to exercise. She just did it on her own because she knew she felt better and she wanted to do that. So the sleep made her feel better and she actually took on this walking program, but she did not lose weight. That to me was like very weird. And that was one of the primary things that IBS and the fact that the sleep failed again at 2 years were all three things that I was like, this is really important, but I don't know what to make of it. Then I fall into the microbiome and all the B vitamins. So the thing that's really fascinating about this is it's not as simple as the D is in the fat. It's really different. There are so many things that connect to the D. If the D makes the microbiome go bad, now we're into all the other. Do we have the raw materials to make ghrelin and leptin? Do we have? There's so many things that come
Okay, but
second to
but
that.
let me make one counter argument that will sound semi-defensive, but it really isn't. On his most recent post, this guy Roger posted about how much D you can generate in the sun, et cetera. And then he says in a little note there, this is targeting, the target here is to get you to 20 nanograms per milliliter. Now that drives me bananas. We have a
That's where he wants to
system.
arrive.
What?
That's where he thinks is his ideal level.
No, but that's what FDA dosing is. So the current recommendation, didn't they upgrade it from 600 to 800 IUs?
It doesn't matter what the
I know,
dosing is worthless.
but they literally designed it to get you to 20. Their definition of toxicity is 150. Everybody with a half a brain about vitamin D says between 40 and 60. Even halfway awake doctors will mark you as low if you're in the low 30s. So the government, it makes no sense. And yet, if you get a test and you're 18, your doctor will call you on your cell phone and tell you it's time to take 50,000 once a week for 10. It's just the dumbest system possible. It's like, I want you to be on the razor's edge of just barely sufficient in this nutrient because I'm so scared of what's going to happen. Now, if you part of the reason why the if the D is not getting sequestered in the fat equally for all people, the other perspective about this, though, to keep in mind is that the person taking the dose, they get very obsessive about wanting to see that level rise.
Yes.
So if you tell them, well, 3,000 or 4,000 gets most people to 40, and then they take that much and they don't get to 40, they're really upset. And so
And then
the
they make
defense,
up reasons why they don't get there, like they're obese, or Jack Cruz's explanation was that everybody in LA it takes enough, quote unquote, enough vitamin D. And I like Jack Cruz in some ways. He's very difficult to listen to, but he's relatively smart, I think. He says, I think it's all those electromagnetic frequencies that are generated that are above LA that blocks the sunlight there. And his explanation could be uh, as good as someone else's. I'll see if I can find that. I'm very interested in this concept that fat people need bigger doses because I think it's wrong I think it's another way that we blame fat people for their own disease. Because this idea that this is a fat soluble vitamin, therefore it's dissolved in the fat. We don't think of that for testosterone. We don't think of that for estrogen. We never do that for thyroid. We don't give a bigger dose to a fat person with thyroid. We give them a dose, we do the levels, we look at the TSH and the T3 and T4 at least. We look at the testosterone level. We don't say, oh, this guy's 50 pounds overweight. I'm going to start at a bigger dose. It's a weird combination of the mental state that comes from word vitamin and the actuality, which is this is a hormone that has such complex effects that we don't understand. We understand one thousand, 1/10,000th of what we should understand. Yet you and I both clearly think that we need to supplement in some way or go outside.
see, I don't see the blame in it. I mean, I think if you take a bit, the argument I was making is, first off, let's go back to evolution. That was an evolutionary advantage. How did people move out of Africa and go to someplace like Sweden? The answer is we know how that worked. They were out in the fields harvesting. At the end of the season, their levels probably went to 120 or something like that. Then they had abundant amounts of food, which their bodies turned into fat. That comes up in the Kessler book. He's talking over and over again about, can if your body can take something like a piece of bread and turn it into fat, that's a survival advantage. That's not a malfunction. You're going to be alive when the other guy died because he couldn't survive until the next harvest.
But you
That's
know what's
that's
weird, Rob? When we look around, and I would have said exactly the same thing. Like if you look at a herd of antelopes, if you look at lions, if you look at guinea pigs, every animal living in the wild is not obese. They are not obese. So humans, the only ones that are obese are our dogs and our cats, the pets that live inside. So there's a connection between living outdoors it's not going to be just D. I mean, I really think that there are multiple other wavelengths. I don't care about the electromagnetic radiation ideas,
Well, I
not
think
because
that
they're
argument's
important.
bogus too, because I have a meter. So my meter is getting hit by UVB rays when I hold it in Los Angeles. So that
Yeah,
makes no sense.
I don't care about that stuff, but I do understand that if I look at it through the lens of, well, somehow none of these animals that are living outdoors are obese. Yet, you're right. You would think that if we had enough food, that we'd put on weight, and then, in actual fact, if you think of it in a slightly different way, we just went to Alaska. If you look at the seals and the sea lions and the killer whales that go to Alaska, apparently they feed for 3 months there, and then they may not eat again for 2 or 3 months. Like those penguins that hang out in in the southern hemisphere for like an unimaginable weather and not eating at all for months on end. There is a clear use of fat deposits
Of course.
during that time.
Of course. I saw
Yeah.
this amazing show about seals, and these guys studied them for months and months, and the conclusion they came to was we save the whales, which meant fewer herring. The seals have to go get fish that aren't as fatty as herring. They die because they don't build up large enough fat deposits.
So actually, my statement that we don't see any obese animals is incorrect because we see the sea lions and those seals. If we saw a seal with no fat on him, we would go, "Whoa, that
That
doesn't."
guy's got like 2 weeks to live,
Yeah,
and he's
exactly,
going to burn up the
exactly.
last of his energy going after fish that's not going to get him where he needs to go, which is
Yeah.
tragic. I mean, I don't know what your overall theories are about obesity, but Kessler says in the beginning of his book something I've thought for a really long time. It's the food system, period. There are no other explanations. It's certainly not behavior, and it's not genes. It's the food system, and part of the reason why that one of the things that's been interesting in the last couple of years is the microbiome dropped in like the end of the 2000s and just was like a you know massive bomb that just went off and affected everything in nutrition. And finally, it made its way around to these studies of fat. And the newer theories are he's got a new term. Like I read that book, the guy who wrote the book about UPF, ultra processed foods. Kessler has a different term, which is ultra formulated foods, which, if you think about it, is kind of better because tofu is an ultra processed food
Mm.
that's also great for you and you should eat it. But when they start putting stabilizers and gums and all these other things into the food, well, one of my favorite YouTubers is like went through every fake sweetener and said, they're all dead to me because they all alter your microbiome, period. They're trying to
Who's your
trick you.
favorite YouTuber that said that?
She's her name's Dr. Lou. Let me her
LIU?
LIU. Yeah, she's an MD at Loma Linda. Oh wow, her channel is called Healthy Immune Doc.
My final feeling is that not only do I know nothing, but we don't know anything, and that it's the curiosity and an open-mindedness. That's why I talk to anybody who wants to have a conversation like you. I mean, the D-minder to me has some things that I don't like about it, even though I haven't looked into it deeply. But I no longer talk about things as though, oh, Rob's ideas are not right. I just don't see it that way anymore because I don't think we really know. And I think continuing to be curious is really important. And you're clearly someone who has continued to be curious. So tell me about what tell me about Dr. Lou and what your ideas are. Continue, and I'll stop blabbering,
Well, I mean,
interrupting.
basically, what she's saying is that these foods alter the microbiome, all in the name of tricking your brain to think that it got something that it didn't get. And guess what? The trick doesn't actually work anyway. So you take a sweetener like monk fruit, It's like, oh, it tastes sweet. You're gonna love what you made with it, your little brownie or whatever. And it's got 0 calories. And in reality, studies showed it doesn't really have 0 calories. And the trick doesn't really survive. It occurs in that first period while you're eating it, but digestion is a long process, and the brain catches up to it and kind of flips the lid on it.
You like Jason Fung's stuff about fasting? Have you ever listened to his stuff?
Whose stuff?
Jason Fung,
Oh
Fung.
yeah, of course. So Jason Fung's book on obesity, I really like that book, The Obesity Code. Um, then he went on to fasting because the obesity book was brutal. And so he wanted to feel like, we got to be able to find a solution to this. And so, he went on to the fasting stuff. Interestingly, I don't, have you seen any of the stuff from that guy who's at USC named Walter Longo? He's a longevity guy.
Walter,
Yeah, Longo.
Valter.
Um, yeah, so
No,
he's
I
got,
haven't, but I'm interested.
yeah, he's a longevity guy who, I found him a while ago, but then now he's started to explode again because I guess he's been doing a couple of shows. He's shown up on a lot of channels. And I saw a recent interview with him, so I went back and listened to his book again. And his book, what he does this fasting mimicking diet. And essentially, he likes fasting because he says there's really nothing you can do that's going to produce as much alteration to your body as fasting. Profound changes that you can just, but the problem, I think the Jason Fung stuff was like he was a 16/8 guy, right? And then there was all those other modalities, the 5-2 thing. So whenever I find anybody, I try and figure out, how close they are to what I would call a pumper, somebody who's like a self-help person who's promoting some protocol that's going to build their brand. That the guy who wrote that book, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker, go look at a picture of him when his book was published and a picture now. You can't even recognize him.
Why?
Well, he got a complete makeover and now he's like the gym guys adopted him. And so now they decided he didn't look cool the way he was. And now he's kind of like a Huberman guy. He looks like he's buff and just literal, if you put those two pictures side by side, I think 1 in 10 people would say they were the same person. But what I'm saying is, and this comes up in a lot of other stuff. I mean, a lot of the YouTubers turned on Peter Attia because Peter Attia's book was a huge splash. But then I'm not saying you're saying this, but you probably know if you read Peter Attia's book, he comes out and he says, we can't say anything about what food you should eat. Nutritional science is 100% total failure. And everything, if anybody tells you that you should or shouldn't eat something. Now, the reason why he was saying that was he flew the keto flag. He jumped on the keto wagon. And almost everybody, including Mercola now, got off the keto wagon. But Atia got mad about it. And
Well, he got mad about what?
the fact that keto got completely blasted. Um, this is back on the thing we were talking about. You were saying about the group not accepting the guy who makes them feel stupid. This so this whole thing of why, if it's fine to have a philosophy, it's just good to not get your whole identity wound up with your philosophy. I think you want to stand aside from it and say, we still have tons to learn. That's part of what you're saying that I
Yeah,
really like.
yeah,
And that's what I said in the note I sent you. I totally agree with that. And also, I mean, the other thing to think about too is how much of this is new information. So I saw this thing today that was saying, well, you should look at vitamin D and melatonin as like two sides of the same coin. They're both hormones. One's the hormone of like nighttime, and the other one's this hormone of day. And it's like, and how did we figure that out? And when did we figure it out? I don't, have you ever seen this book called Winston Churchill's Afternoon Nap?
No.
It's about the guys who first started to try and find the master clock in the body. And that was only in the 1980s. And guess what? They didn't find it because there isn't one. There's clocks everywhere. And I don't even think that message has been fully absorbed yet. And it's not this is what I'm saying too. It's not a message influencers want. You take like media, say one thing really quickly about influencers and media people. I was thinking about as I was going through this book by Kessler, one of the most influential media people of all time, Oprah Winfrey, the largest contributor to her wealth was money she made selling diet stuff, which ultimately completely failed. 100% totally failed. Um, and then you say to yourself, well, not everybody's right about everything. Well, yeah, I understand that. But when it's business, it's maybe a good idea to think, let's try and separate those things or keep those things separate. I mean, in terms of things like the other thing I was thinking that's similar to that is like Howard Stern, through the longest run of his media empire, building his media empire, his number one advertiser was the guy selling mattresses. And that mattress thing was all like, you can't sleep because you have a crappy mattress. Come buy a new one. My thing with sleep is I tell people the biggest problem if you pay attention to sleep is that there's so many factors. And if you think that you're going to get a new mattress or you're going to get silk pajamas and all your problems are going to go away, you are lost. You have to worry about everything from temperature in the room. Is your room light, tight? Is there circulating air? How much CO2 is building up? What did you do before you went to bed? And as you said, I'd be interested to see what that Siegel guy would think of I don't know if you saw this, the Huberman debacle, where originally when the thing came out where it was like, don't look at your phone before you go to bed, and then Tim Cook changed all the phones to yellow. But then when they went and looked at the actual data set, what they found out was anybody who went outside that day, that effect was not seen. So, in other words, yes, if you're going to live in the bottom of a mine every day, all day, then yeah, maybe that little yellow screen is going to help you. It's the dumbest thing in the world. And Huberman originally said he thought it was bunk, and then one day he shows up on his podcast with yellow glasses and just got absolutely ribbed to death online. And of course, he was selling them.
Yeah.
So I these are it's kind of funny. I don't know if you've ever heard of this filmmaker named Preston Sturges. His films were mostly made in the 1940s. So he made a film called Christmas in July, where this guy enters a contest to think up a slogan for a coffee company. And his slogan is, if you can't sleep at night, it isn't the coffee, it's the bunk. And he ends up winning this contest. But it's a perfect example of this exact thing. It's like, who are you going to blame for the fact that you can't sleep at night? It's got to be one thing or another. But it's not. It's profoundly not. Getting good night's sleep is super complicated. And it's really interesting, too. You were talking about that, the research going back to the 60s. I happened to get interested in sleep when I was 18 because I read the book On the Road. Then I was reading about the beatniks and found out that they were trying to do lucid dreaming. So I was like, well, what's that? So I start reading about it. And did you know that they were trying to trigger it by taking niacin?
No, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, they were all into lucid dreaming, which was a little bit juvenile, but also
It's
interesting and
still fascinating. I'm fascinated when it happens to me. I love that. It's a
I
great
totally
thing.
agree. And so then I read a lot about sleep. This is back when I was still a teenager. About cycles are 90 minutes long.
Rob,
They
how
go
old are you?
right now. My birthday was like 2 days ago. I just turned 62.
Okay. So I'm 70, so we're relatively contemporaries. Okay. And well, okay, I won't interrupt you anymore. Keep going.
No, no. The main thing I was saying there is I think in some ways when you think about that, the fact that people started to study sleep back then, and we've had so much time since then, and you run into people who didn't even bother to look at things that were figured out in the 50s and the 60s. And so, like, just take REM, for example. There was that movie that was made about the narcoleptic, the Gus Van Sant movie, My Own Private Idaho. And one of the diagnostic criteria for narcolepsy is your brain goes immediately into REM sleep. And do they know why that happens? Um, I've only read theories about that.
I
The
can
main
tell you what my experience is with my clients and my patients, and what the sleep experts are selling about narcolepsy is wrong. It's not the reality of what happens when, and it's got to be multiple things happening. But I keep interrupting you, so let
no,
me
that's
let you, if you want to hear about that, what I'm fascinated by seeing things happen when I'm doing this routine thing, that I'm selling as the right sleep program. And but it's not a recipe. It really is. You have to hang in there. When I'm doing coaching in someone, I have a client right now who's had narcolepsy since she was in her early 20s. She's in her mid to late 30s now. And she went from having narcolepsy then to having narcolepsy and insomnia. And she's seen multiple, she's really smart. She runs like three businesses, and she was a real wreck, and she's tried every single thing. And then we did right sleep with her, and her narcolepsy went away. And the whole idea that it's just antibodies to the orexin producing cells, there are some of them who have antibodies to orexin producing cells, but the idea that that has anything to do, and that was another thing, I just forgot that. Jerry Siegel showed that orexin is really not what keeps us awake. I mean, he showed the actual studies that they've misinterpreted that. They made up a sort of a dogma out of the idea, and its other name is hypocretin or hypocretin, and it has really big connections to leptin and ghrelin. So it's much more complex than the way we're talking about it now. Anyway,
well,
this gal,
one of the things I was going to say about narcolepsy is that um, and this just goes to a general conversation about sleep in general, is one of the other problems that I see. This guy wrote an article a couple of weeks ago where he said, I stopped tracking my sleep, and you should too." Now, I've been using like the Apple Watch to do sleep tracking for years. And essentially, the argument he makes in there is if I look at my report and it's bad, my day is ruined. Why have my day ruined? Well, you're a child. That's like saying I'm not going to get any blood tests because they might tell me my fasting glucose was high. Well, yes, that is true. But that's absurd. I think the other thing I've learned in tracking my sleep is the idea that you're going to get a great night of sleep every night is absurdly
it
stupid.
is. That is
You're
absurd.
not, that's, it's not going to work that way. And this actually made me want to make a sleep app, which wouldn't be the actual tracker, but it would import the data from the trackers. And then it would do things like debt models. So the one good thing from one of the influencer guys who wrote a book on sleep, I saw him interviewed one time, and he said something smart, which was, "Is it true that there's sleep debt?" And he said, "Yes, it is true. You can take out loans, but you have to pay them back quickly." And so let's go back to your narcoleptic.
So
I
what I
read the
but the way I see it now is the person who has something that is clearly not normal, like attacks of sleep. Like if you have an attack that you can't fight off during the day and you're driving, or you're just walking along out in the savannah and you fall down, the lions are going to eat you. Okay, so it's not a survival advantage. to have an attack of sleep. It's also not a survival advantage to be awake and asleep at the same time because you can't distinguish reality from not. Okay. So
Of
becoming
course.
psychotic and not being is very dangerous. So if you picture it through this simplistic lens, which is, you know what? Every animal out there just sleeps. Now, we don't ask them if squirrels wake up in the middle of the night and then go back to sleep or not, but Jerry Siegel has actually done measurements of that. And in the normal setting, they fall asleep and they stay asleep and then they wake up. And it's each animal is a little different. My guinea pigs, it's at dawn and dusk. Same thing for the cats. And it has a lot to do with whether or not you're a predator or you're prey. But ultimately, the way that I see the lens I look through is anyone who has something that's really bad has had something wrong for 20 years, or if they're only 15 years old, probably since their birth, because sleep is the most important thing we do. That means if it goes bad, you're likely going to die soon. And oddly enough, all the other animals have actually been able to sleep without any intervention. They don't have a sleep tracker. No one's told them what to eat. No one tells the squirrels what to eat. That prompts the next question, which is, why don't my guinea pigs eat insects? Why do they only eat things that are actually plants, and then they have to have this special bacteria inside them to be able to get energy from that? Why do horses have to have why do cows have a second stomach? Is it really the bacteria that are manipulating our taste buds and our smell
Yeah.
that then determines what this animal will taste? Because if I give my
Well,
guinea pigs cooked vegetables, they won't eat them.
but isn't that the ultimate revelation of the microbiome? There
It
are
is.
more foreign cells in you than there are your
Yes.
cells.
Yes.
You are the
So,
majority stakeholder in your
okay.
own existence.
And then
The,
let's
the
say,
minority.
yeah, let's say the bacteria are actually running what tastes good to us, but then we enlarge the lens we look through and we say all these animals are running their sleep spontaneously. Most of them are, I mean, all animals have trouble. I think all animals have trouble with their sleep as they're dying, whether they got sick from an infection or something else. But ultimately, this comes about completely spontaneously. And it works perfectly, or we wouldn't be here. And we all have these things. We've been so focused on genetics for so long that now we're seeing these other things that have affected us. But ultimately, the person who has narcolepsy has sleep switches that are malfunctioning. That's the only thing you can say truthfully about them, because what's happening to them is absolutely going to mean that they won't survive. You
Yeah.
could say the same thing. Like there's another syndrome that most sleep experts are not talking about, but it changed the whole way I saw things. And that is a thing called um, transient global amnesia. These are neurologic syndromes that we've named. So transient global amnesia looks like this. When I'm called as the neurologist from the emergency room doctor says, this guy woke up this morning, called his girlfriend, and said, Natalie, I'm seeing blue dogs jumping around in my front yard. He's on the phone. She comes over. He's in the living room. He says, what day is it? And she says, it's Tuesday. And he goes, oh, okay. And then the next thing he says is, what day is it? And he keeps saying, what day is it? In the same tonality. This is a very um, well described set of events. She brings him into the emergency room, and everybody thinks he's having a stroke or gone crazy. As a neurologist, what we learn is I'm going to show up about 3 hours later after they call me. because his CT and his MRI are going to be normal. And what I'm going to tell him is the first question I ask the ER doc is, does he keep saying the same thing over and over? And he goes, yeah. She says he keeps asking, what day is it? And he never asks anything else. He only asks this one thing, same phrasing. And it's different for each person. The next one will be, am I supposed to go to work today? And like somebody's called his wife from the car. He's in the car, he's on the way to work, and he's calling his wife. And, so you are completely awake, able to do everything. What this signifies is the hippocampus, which is our memory machine, has gotten stuck, just like a record. It's repeating. And we're taught about this disease, and then I assume that I should show up 3 hours later, because when I come to the bedside and the family members are there and the person is still saying, what day is it? And I say, oh, this is transient global amnesia, it'll go away. They are not happy because their person is screwed up, okay? If I ask, what's your name? They can actually find their wallet, open it, find the driver's license, but they'll still say, and what day is it? So everything else is working except for the memory machine, okay? One day I have this realization because one of my patients is a teenager and she says, I think I had a seizure last night because I was pulling up a movie and then the next thing that happened to me was I woke up with my face on the keyboard. And her mother and I both say, don't you think you fell asleep? And she says, no, no, you don't understand. I didn't make any memories. And the first question is, how does a human being know that they fell asleep instead of they lost consciousness? How do we know the difference about that? Why does she think she had a seizure? Because we have this slight memory that we were getting in bed and we were drowsy, okay? We all, normal sleepers, know that having a big blank spot is normal. Except I had many teenagers in my practice who, it turns out, if you do a sleep study on them, they have no REM sleep and no deep sleep. And they can all tell you they are aware of the passage of time through the whole night. So for the first time, I think, you know what? Transient global amnesia is everything flipped on in the brainstem. All these switches are like a giant, having multiple switches in a switch box that are all linked together. They're all supposed to link together and flip. Everything flipped except the memory machine didn't turn back on. Many of the people who have this, it's during the morning, especially after intercourse. They'll wake up in the morning, they'll have sex with their wife, the wife comes back and the guy is back in bed and it's now 3 hours later. So there are all these clinical things, but no one's ever thought of it within the context of a sleep disorder. So transient global amnesia, and then if you don't do anything to them, because there's nothing abnormal permanently, sometime an hour later, they'll start to say, how long have I been here? They'll add an additional thing. They will have this period of time where they never made a memory. They will never get that back. And then their memory starts to come back again. That is a sleep disorder also, just like cataplexy. So they say these weird things like narcolepsy, cataplexy, and vivid dreaming or hypnagogic hallucinations are the three characteristics of narcolepsy. Well, that's bullshit. You can have that in all sorts of different presentations. It's a way to make a list for neurologists to take a test and how to teach neurology, but it doesn't give you what you really need to know, which is these switches have worked perfectly forever, or we wouldn't be here. And now these are things that happen in a clinical way that tell us the switches aren't switching right. Ultimately, you have to get the switches to be right. And the weird thing is, I'm using vitamins, but vitamins are not the answer. D is not the answer. Sleep is the answer. That means if D was okay for a while, my patients started to sleep better, but D by itself, it just bottomed out and everybody got worse, including me. And then we added other things and I got the microbiome back. And then I, learned that if you give them B50, that's the other thing that our human, but That's a little tiny bit, like a tiny little wedge of the pie. And then once I start doing this with the bringing the microbiome back, it turns out everybody who has a sleep disorder has got a bunch of other this things that are have been depleted. And if I don't get more information about that, I give them bad advice. Not intentionally, but as simple as I want to make it, it's it's never really that simple. And your original point was it's so complicated. I completely agree with you. But it's fascinating to be able to see someone go from narcolepsy, cataplexy, sleep terrors while they're awake. They're fully awake, but they are still experiencing their dream. So they have one foot in wake and one in sleep and think, wait, that's really never supposed to happen. And when the sleep switches are working normally, that never happens. How
I
did
have
I,
a Yeah, I
yeah,
have a tiny theory on that case that,
tell me
of
about it.
course, I know nothing about it, but the whole reason I wrote my app was I was reading the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs tells Isaacson, I know that I got sick when I became CEO of both Pixar and Apple. And one of the things that they had already talked about was he would go out and walk during the afternoons. That stopped because he had an 8 hour shift at one company, got in his car and did an 8 hour shift at the other. But do you know what the word karoshi means?
No,
It's the Japanese word for working yourself to death. And Americans don't have a word for that. We should have been, if you put a dictionary out, we should be listed as the inventors of it because I'm sure the Japanese have done a lot of it. I'll bet we've done a lot more. And throw two cases in there in addition to Steve Jobs. The thing that made me want to write my app was as I was realizing that he worked himself to death and also that he didn't get out during the day, I thought, well, he was also half Syrian, which means at the very least, his Fitzpatrick type would be 3. He's living in a place where he's 37 degrees from the equator, which you lived there for a while. You're now closer to the equator than I am. You're at 32. So you're inside the blackout zone. Um, at 37, the blackout is literally for at least 3 to 4 months a year, where he'll make no D, any incidental D. And of course, back then, nobody was supplementing D. But also on the work to death thing, um, this is a question, as you were talking about those disorders, that I think is really fascinating. And it relates to sleep and it also relates to the microbiome. People get things like antibiotics and it kills the good stuff in their guts. One of the most mind-blowing nutritional things I learned last year was there's a good bacteria in your mouth that is needed to extract nitrates from food. So you eat some arugula, you chew it up, this good bacteria goes in there. That's how the nitric oxide gets made. You happen to be a user of mouthwash, forget it. You killed that bacteria. And now your whole nitric oxide production system is kerflunked. And you're basic. A lot of people, there's a guy on that same podcast last week who was saying nitric oxide is the root of all metabolic disorders. It all starts with not making nitric oxide. But the other thing about the bacteria stuff is like all of that stuff evolved over time.
yes.
Now you go in there and you muddle with that stuff. I have a friend who got diverticulosis. Then one of the pouches lacerated. The solution at his healthcare provider was we have to keep you here for a week because we don't want to operate on you because the laceration is small, but we're going to bombard you with intravenous and antibiotics. That was like 2 years ago. He told me as recently as last week his gut is still not the same. And we now know, I mean, again, if let's say when the microbiome really blew wide open was the end of the 2000s. Recently, there have been studies that have said it might not ever go back to normal. You might have
No, that's
killed
not
every,
correct. That is not correct.
really.
No, you need a combination of D and all 8 Bs, and it goes back to normal in 3 months. And I know that because it's been consistently the case for 10 years. But if you don't do that, if you do D and you don't bring back the microbiome, bad shit happens to you. And that is a really why I have a website, because recommending D without levels is bad. But recommending D without bringing back the microbiome just puts you at risk for needing more of these B vitamins that you cannot make anymore in your gut. And that was a hypothesis, but it's now been very well supported in various other ways too. And I think B5 is the primary B that becomes deficient, but most of them are needed alongside. I would also say that these are hypotheses again, but the idea that antibiotics were to blame is what we're sold. Okay, it's not wrong that they kill bacteria. That's true. However, we got the antibiotics originally from a fungus, and we know that these bacteria that live inside us make antiviral agents, antifungal agents, and antibiotic, anti-life agents, and they protect us. So when you bring back your microbiome, it not only changes what your belly is telling you about, but my armpits smell different. I have different species growing in my armpits. Our body odor is actually a product of which bacterial species we have. Same thing with what you're saying about the mouth. So it's true that the antibiotics change what's happening there, but the odd thing is all of these bacteria, viruses, and fungus not only are in your GI tract, they climb over your whole body. They're in certain parts of your scalp, inside your nose and your ears, all in your perineal area. They are protecting us. On your feet, the same thing. So saying that it was antibiotics that did this to us is too limited. There's two reasons. First was that. The second is I was alive and you were actually alive during the time between 1945 and 1985 when we had lots of antibiotic use. We had antibiotics for everything, but IBS did not show up as a symptom until the middle 80s. The very first reports of non-alcoholic fatty liver, middle 80s, IBS, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, things that in my group in medical school were still, if you talk to my generation, we'd go, those are all fucking made up diseases because we still don't know what causes them. And they didn't exist when I was in medical school. And you can see that
And
same
yet
factors are the same.
every one of them is like a four-story apartment fire. I mean, I
You
have a
know,
friend who's been in the Cedars GI practice, and that's like rated the one or number two, no, number two the last year in U.S. News and World Report. And it's just they're really great. The doctors there are great, but you go there and you just get the sense of they're just, underwater all the time. They've got a gigantic practice with tons of people who they are able to keep them on the track for a while and
they
then
keep them
they go
alive,
off.
but they didn't fix it and they don't think about why. So in in my experience, my first experience with D was baffling. Just exactly what you're experiencing. You've been baffled. I'm an MD, so I've been practicing all this time. I find Walter's stuff from the early 80s and I go, wait, I could have learned this when I was studying endocrinology in medical school. It's baffling. And then the next thing that happens is I stumble into this microbiome stuff, and it's definitely not my field. And all these things that sort of tie together absolutely have to do with the microbiome. But once I was able to get the microbiome back, and it's not hard to do, then you start to see these really big and permanent changes. So some of the things that I got to see in my practice were one, I was originally studying headache, which turns out to be the hardest thing to fix.
Okay.
And because it's the hardest thing to fix, you had to have the vitamins really don't make a difference in headache. The sleep makes a difference. It's really heavily connected to sleep. But all the other things that I was seeing, like autoimmune diseases that are neurologists sees, MS, the same sort of disease, but attacking the peripheral nerves, myasthenia gravis, people who have, let's say, daily headache or seizures, but are seen by a rheumatologist at the same time for some other autoimmune disease. I got to see those people actually sleep better enough that I could take them off over a period of 2 or 3 years, the the immune system modulating drugs that I was thrilled with. Okay, my education was exactly like every other MD. I'm not interested in supplements, but focusing on sleep and saying, I don't care what it is, CPAP, dental sleep intervention, which is really important to me now, these vitamins, every single path that leads to better sleep allows then your body to actually repair mistakes in your immune system that have been present in you for 20 years. And then I can actually see the outcome of that being really different. And for instance, in the GI world, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, in my personal experience with this right sleep thing where it's very simple. You get the D into range. It's a higher range than the ones that most people are. It's a range that helps the sleep. You give them B50, the Crohn's disease and the ulcerative colitis go away. They don't get symptoms anymore. It's one of the first things, and it's sustained for a very long time. There are many other manifestations that each one of those people will have that no one linked to those diseases. They'll have skin lesions, they'll have joint pain, they have other things that we named like psoriatic arthritis that will come and go as the vitamins are, we're tapering the vitamins as they have bad sleep because they go to Europe, or as they have bad sleep because they get an antibiotic, for instance. So all of these paths that lead to better sleep, if you keep focusing on the sleep, you start to see the diseases actually melt away. It's not because of any one intervention. It's not the diet. It's not the exercise. It's not just being outdoors. It's all of them. It's all of them. But getting the sleep better is always in the background when you start to see these diseases get better. I'm sorry, I'm getting like very revved up because of our conversation.
That's fun. That I think it's a good measure. It's the best measure. The interesting thing about that too is that I'm glad that you believe that. The only reason why I was saying that people say that you can't bring the gut back is that once you've gotten to the point where you think, I mean, and you really, it's not hard to find lots of influencers out there who are telling people who wants to eat beans? You eat beans and they're just going to make you gassy. Excuse me, that was a test and you failed it. That's the problem. I can eat 2 cups of cooked beans and not get gassy at all. So that's as a matter of fact, I was driving my car the other day with my dogs in the back thinking, maybe I should make an app where it just gives you little progressive challenges, like have a cup of tofu tonight. Did you get bloated? Did you get gassy? But this is the other thing that I'm really fascinated about is that I think this is another way that you and I are very similar is that for a lot of your life, you think, well, everything that was worth thinking about, somebody's already, figured it out. Then I get to like the age of 50 or 60 and I start thinking, nobody's done anything. What
You're
are
right.
we doing?
Nobody's
We've
done
had like
anything.
50 years to figure out sleep and we haven't figured out anything. And the things we have figured out, we just come up with a dumb answer and we just grab onto that answer and we yell about anybody who disagrees with it. I mean, a good example there is like, okay, yes, your room needs to be dark. Well, that's because those first studies showed that if there's even as much light as would come from a nightlight, your brain doesn't produce melatonin. That's an interesting finding, but go beyond that, back to the thing of the two sides of the coin. If you're D deficient, and you have a really dark room, are you producing melatonin? Are you producing enough melatonin? There's a really fascinating thing I was reading about how Ben Franklin was biphasic. In his journals, he would write about the fact that he would sleep like 4 hours. Then he'd wake up, he'd throw all the windows open, he'd like wring out his bed clothing, and then he'd go sleep for another 3 or 4 hours. And then I got an AirNet during the pandemic, and I happened to have it in my sleep room for a while. I couldn't believe how high the CO2 was getting. So I was thinking, well, maybe the biphasic sleep, he throws the windows open, he's resetting everything and going back to a base load of CO2. And we have study data that shows CO2 gets over 600, basically no restorative sleep. You know,
Mm, that's
RAM
fascinating
and
too.
RAM goes down. But the other thing on the we don't really know anything, I was marveling today at the fact that one of the most important things that was figured out about sleep in the last 10 years was not even figured out by sleep researchers. It was we wasted the first 10 years of studying dementia because somebody noticed that the brain had plaques. And so the classic human thing was like, well, let's come up with a drug that can just go in there and make all the plaques disappear. That should be easy. That's almost as dumb as can we spray bleach? But then somebody said, you know what, guys? Oh my God, 10 years later, it turns out there is a system that does that. It's called the glymphatic system. But the bad news is it only runs during deep sleep, during NREM. But then I saw other studies that said, no, it actually runs during REM also. But then just to go back to what we were also talking about when you were talking about fat sequestration, now it turns out that in fact during exercise, some glymphatic cleansing occurs. Then I saw some things that were saying getting someone to do neck and shoulders can in fact uh, encourage glymphatic cleansing. But Gregor did a series of videos, and in one of them, he said, this lymphatic cleansing is so important. And he says, I'm going to do another video about it. Never did the follow-up video. And one of my main questions from that, and I've gone and asked the bots this question, is how long does that take? Because think about this. You get the watch. The watch tells you got 1 hour of NREM last night, and your brain is like, well, that's good because the night before I had 30 minutes. That's better. But if lymphatic cleansing runs in 15 minutes, it's not better. It doesn't matter. We need more information. We need somebody who can walk in and say, and again, I return to the B12 thing. The sad thing about the B12 thing is, yes, you'll know that you were deficient by the logical outcome, which is your brain will shrink. The bad part is by then you can take the B12 supplement, it won't shrink more, but it's not going to grow back. So I think a lot of the stuff about sleep also, even the little things that we did figure out, people just stopped thinking about them, and there's just so much more to
Bob,
uncover
what do
there.
you do with all this amazing curiosity? And I see that you build websites and stuff like that. Are you doing anything else where you put forth your own ideas?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been working on lately is, as I said in the email that I sent you, is the now that the AI, everything in tech, just when the first really good GPT dropped, just the whole tech industry just almost seized up. Half the projects that were going on that had money behind them stopped, and now all this is a negative part of the tech industry is it's mostly fortune seeking people who want to get a 10 bagger in 18 months. But believe it or not, the first AI project I did was in 1992. That's and I've been on a lot of AI projects since then. And so I think the GPTs are amazing. And I think they're really fascinating what they can do. And I use them every day. But I think one of the things I'm really interested in now is the thing we talked about at the very beginning, which is when do we start taking this sea of information and start turning it into knowledge? Now, if you go ask the bot about some of these sleep things, it will give you some remarkable answers. But I want to go back to something
But
you
they're all the
raised before.
answers that had been generated by human beings.
Yep.
That's really important.
Yep. And some of it has been synthesized, but yeah, believe me, that's like a whole other conversation because when I wrote my D app, I actually went and obtained a patent because I had done patents before. And it's nauseating to me that the tech industry, they all file patents, but when other people have patents, they don't feel like they should have any regard for them at all. If they want,
Are you still doing the D app, the DMinder app for free?
well, it's a combination. There is a free version of it, and the free version of it is fully functional. And then there's a version you can pay $1.99 for that'll turn off ads, which is ludicrous. I mean, if you don't have $1.99, you want to send
Yeah.
me an email ranting about the ads, I'm just going to laugh. I don't care. Um, but the only reason why I even put ads in the thing was I had a friend of mine who I knew since the 1980s, who's a musician, and his youngest son wanted to come intern with me. He was just about done getting a degree in CS, so he became my intern. And uh-oh, I think my camera ran out of juice. It doesn't matter. I've got another camera. So anyway, I when he became my intern, I wanted to pay him. So my goal was to just get the app to generate enough revenue
That's
that
still
I
pretty
could.
nice to
Yeah,
do that for so little.
well, but also, I mean, the other thing, I still have a lot of things I will and want to do with the app. One of the things that we just worked on yesterday was the ability to just import workouts, because almost everybody who buys a watch, one of the primary things they do is if I go walk my dogs, I start the thing, it tracks my workout, it
Yeah, yeah,
counts my
yeah.
steps. Now what'll happen is DMinder will see that you took a dog walk at 11 a.m. All you have to do is say you had shorts and a t-shirt on, and it'll use the GPS information to figure out how much D you would have made. By the
Cool.
way, I wanted to leave enough time for you to tell me what you don't like about DMinder, because maybe it's
I
something I could
I
fix.
find that this was my observation in doing so the Endocrine Society complained that we didn't have enough clinical information where people were recording what happened to the D level in response to X dose, okay, in hundreds of people. That's exactly what I did, not being completely naive. Okay. I'm not an endocrinologist. I've never worked with hormones before. I've never done levels of any kind. And I think if I knew then what I know now, I never would have stepped into it. But my experience was that I could not actually predict what sort of dose anyone would need at the beginning based on the number that we got at the beginning. Okay. So if somebody has a level of, let's say, 21, and they're 15 years old, and they were a lifeguard for the last 3 years because they love swimming and they've always been, so they were a lifeguard on the beach. And then they get a real job at age 17 at the Target warehouse for the summer. And they do that for 2 summers. And now they're seeing me because they're starting to have headaches. This is a guy. And they've never had any trouble with their sleep. And now they do. And this is the first time that they can't really say that their sleep is bad, but they have these headaches. And we get their level, and it's 21. And that person has to take 5,000 IUs per day in order to get a level in 1 month that's 41. And then we stay at 5,000 and it gets up to 61. So it's gone up by 20 points every month on 5,000 a day. And we're doing it monthly. So that's one clinical story. Then I have the next person who's got a level of 21. And again, you have to look at the month. So it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that there's a level of unknown in the background. And everything that I'm going to say is different after you've been on D for 2 or 3 years. But when you
That's
first get the
that
first
that was
level,
the first thing I was going to say.
yes, it's always about so let's say the next person has a level of 18. And the important part is she just had a twin pregnancy and just delivers. And she'd had another kid 2 years before. So she just had three children in a period of really 3 years. And her level is 18. It turns out that her history before getting pregnant of what her sleep was like, what medical problems she had, etc., turns out to be telling a big story because that woman then has to go to, she does 15,000 IUs and she does 15,000 IUs based on a level of 18. She's not seeing me, she's using my workbook, and her level goes to 23. And then she does 15,000 for another month, and her level goes to 25. And then we go up to 20,000, and her level goes up to like 38. Okay. They both started really similar, but there's the level of depletion that you can only see through taking the clinical history. And that was totally baffling to me. There was nothing I'd ever seen in medicine that matched this. Why can I give 5,000 to this guy and he goes up by 20, and she goes up by, takes 15 and she goes up by 5? There is no relationship there. How do I make sense of this? Okay. And ultimately, over a period of 2 years, the clinical history became the most important thing. There's another 15-year-old or 17-year-old, let's say, that wasn't a lifeguard who had bad allergies and asthma and was a colicky baby. And he was the third baby in terms of birth order. And his mom developed MS 2 months after he was born. And so there are these clinical histories that all of a sudden take on this significance. So I begin to ask, which kid were you in the birth order? Does your mom have any medical problems? And I can actually take her medical history and say, she lost her microbiome after the second kid. This child was in utero with not only a low D because mom's D was low, but the supplier of the B vitamins, which are pivotal for all developmental things and for everything that makes the immune system be normal, were not being supplied by her microbiome. That's the only source. Even if she took prenatal vitamins, which were fucking worthless because the doses are wrong, he starts off with an immune system disorder. He comes in and we do a level in him and it's 21. His response to the D dose is going to be different. So if you've been doing D for a long time and you've been doing levels all the time, the recommendations, everything else that you do with your app in terms of teaching people about how much of the time and what latitude are they at, and you need to do levels. Those are all perfectly valid. And what you said in that video, which I really liked, was I want to get people interested in this. I want them to be focused on it and to learn about it. The thing that's difficult is you really cannot recommend certain doses without data from that person. You must have 2 or 3 D levels to be able to say, this is what you need to do now. You need to see what's the difference, what's the delta, and what was the dose to get a general sense of where to go. And then the second thing that happened to me was in some of the people that were really, really sick, that really shouldn't be using any of these minders for anything, that are like 32 years old, have 18 medicines, they see 8 practitioners, their kid is autistic, they haven't slept since they were a little kid, they've been constipated their whole life, they're 80 pounds overweight. I got a couple of my patients up to 30,000 IUs a day. It took me 6 months to be willing to do that because their level wasn't going anywhere. Like every month, we'd be like, shit, they're on 20,000 and their level is still going down. So she goes to 80,000, she goes to 30,000 a day, and slowly her level starts to go up. And I was using John Cannell's recommendations that he said we make 20,000 in a day. I didn't know what to do. His advice seemed to be more believable than most other people's. So I wouldn't go above 20,000 as a daily dose. But some of my patients that were sick as hell, this gal is on 30,000 and she's on 30,000 for 3 years and she comes back. And also, you have to picture that these are all people who have neurologic illness and they're still seeing me over years. That's not what I'm doing with clients right now, which is really important because you lose a lot of information. What happens in the fifth year after doing right sleep, or what happens? So anyway, she's seeing me for 3 years for chronic pain and a million other things, and all of a sudden she says, I'm going back to work." She'd been on disability since her son was born. And I'm like, "You're going back to work?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm feeling much better. I'm going back to work." She's been on this work hardening system and everything. Like, one, she's been getting better over this 3 years where she's taking 30,000 IUs per day. So I'm seeing things in her body. This woman had endometriosis. She had polycystic ovarian syndrome. She had chronic pain in her leg that they said was, she had a million, she had fibromyalgia, chronic headaches, the whole bit. A lot of these things are getting better. And then the following year, she comes back and her D level is way high. It's like 110. And I say, "What the hell? Did you change the supply or did you change something?" Because she's been on 30,000 a day forever. As she's getting better, and I'm going to tell you what I'm picturing, but I don't know if I'm right. We have to drop her dose down to 15,000. And then within about 6 months, we have to drop it again to 10,000. Because I'm so focused on sleep as a form of repair, what I'm picturing happening is her body is actually using 30,000 IUs a day because she's got so many holes in so many systems. Oddly, instead of thinking of it as she has a genetic mutation that means that she has to take 30,000, because I'm following her for 5 years, then in the fourth year, after lots of things have gotten better, the amount that she needs every day starts to drop. And she gets down into the same range as all my other patients who are basically around the first 5 years. Most of us were on 10,000 in the winter and 5,000 in the summer. But many of us in the fifth year started to actually have to drop our dose. So even those of us that weren't that sick, as you take it for a long time, my hypothesis is we've finished out the deferred repairs. Now we're actually getting to a place where we now can say, this is the amount of D that we need every day to do daily maintenance. We had lots of deferred repairs because we've all been sick enough to get a sleep disorder that then resulted in deferred repairs that got us to a neurologist. Okay. That's not the same thing as I'm a perfectly normal person and I want to have the best volleyball, beach volleyball ever. Okay. That's not the same thing. These are people who are sick enough to come to a neurologist. So there are aspects about being able to recommend a dose to someone based on sun exposure or any other thing without the clinical history. But I really also think I don't ever criticize a deminder because really the people that are using that are not necessarily the people that were so sick that they were seeing me.
Right.
That's a different population. So those things
But
may
I
not
mean,
be
of
happening.
course, I think everything you're saying to me is exciting because I worked on a surveys project a while ago, and we had to write a whole survey system. And basically, what we were doing was it was around employee satisfaction, and so we did all this stuff where all the employees could, fill out these surveys. And recently, I started thinking, all of modern science, the whole edifice of modern science was built on surveys, period. There's just no two ways around it. All studies are you enroll people in a study and you get them to fill out surveys. Now, this is one of the things that's super exciting about where we're at right now. I want to go back to my survey software and now I want to change it because we have one huge new thing we can do with AI, which is all surveys in the past had to essentially be more or less the same for everybody. Now, you could have a thing where you say, well, answer this question. If it's no, just skip the rest of this section. But with bots, you could go berserk in any direction you want. Number one. And number two is you can let people talk. I pitched an idea. One of the startups I was at was started by a movie producer. And after I had sinus surgery and I learned all this stuff about sinuses and everything, I went to lunch with him and I was like, we got to do an app where all these people have these things happen to them. They will talk for hours if you let them. Take all that information and use it to start building data sets, for God's sakes. Then maybe we'll figure some stuff out. Like, for instance, here's the protocol for diagnosing sinus infections and then eventually uh, sending you to surgery is I diagnosed myself because I kept having these headaches. I had all these other things happen. One day I touched my cheek, ran to the computer, added facial tenderness, bingo, you have a sinus infection. Got a CT scan. My front maxillary sinus was 100% occluded. My doctor was laughing in my face. He said, I've never seen this. 100%. You know why it was 100%? A biofilm had grown through the whole maxillary. And how many, you're talking about how many people did we see with IBS in the 1950s? How many people of those turned up in the 1950s? Zero. And now that guy who was in a list of 200 best doctors in the United States was telling me it's half his practice now is fungal infections. But anyway, to make a long story short, that process of how do you figure out you have a sinus infection? Then what do we do about it? They give you antibiotics. That's what they do. But guess what? What happens if you give somebody an antibiotic who has a fungal infection? The fungus goes even more crazy because you just killed its only competitor in the space. So then I end up with surgery. But the basic idea there was build data sets and get people to talk about the different versions of what happened in their cases, which is exactly what you're saying. So you're making me want to put a thing on the front end to say, and by the way, that woman who I was saying is my goat of YouTube influencers, Dr. Lou, she's told the story many times on her channel that her father went for a blood test. They found no circulating D. Zero was his level. And he later died because essentially his frame collapsed. So this is the other thing I would say in my own defense too, is like, and by the way, I've had discussions about this before, like, how could you know what the level was, and I totally agree with that. But one thing that was funny was when I met Cannell, I was standing at that conference. I was talking to him. He goes, man, you did a good job here. You're really well positioned. And I said, well, some people come up and they say to me, how do you know the levels? And he goes, who cares? The precision is not important. Now, I would make that same argument and I would go back to what I was saying, which is D, let's just take the FDA and say 20 is the starting point, 150 is. See, the other thing too, I've been thinking about recently is developing what I call as a risk model. So let's take something like your house burning down. I was just reading an article today that nobody can get insurance in Florida. And now California is going to end up in the same boat. And lots of other states are going to follow. I know people who think the whole state of Colorado is going to ultimately burn down. But risk models are very interesting because you're pouring all this energy into something that might not happen. And these last two fires that happened in Los Angeles, of course, we had people running onto YouTube going, the fire hydrant was out of water. Man, you just announced to the world that you are a complete idiot. Here's what really happened. The wind came in due north at 100 miles an hour. There's nothing you're going to do with a fire hose against coals rolling through a street at 80 miles an hour. A hose is going to do nothing. And wind never came from that direction. That's why it went straight down to the Palisades. And by the way, the Palisades fire was started by the utility, and so was the Eaton fire, which almost nobody talks about. So this goes back to what do we know? What are the causes of things? Do we even care? Do we want to uncover these things? Now, I'm not saying I don't want to get that level right. And there's another part of what you're saying that's super fascinating that goes back to what I was saying about the microbiome is, do you remember, I don't know if you paid much attention when the K2 people came running in, they were all excited at the discovery of K2. The guy who discovered K won the Nobel Prize. He knew there was two forms of K, but he didn't really dig out all the implications of K2. So these people came running in saying, "Oh my God, you got to eat butter that was from grass fed." All these silly little singular. But there was one really interesting thing that came out of that, which was people were saying, "Well, how do you even know if you have enough K2?" And went back to the same thing we've been talking about. Well, if I administer a test, I can see it circulating. Does that mean anything? And then there's a whole branch of people that were saying, well, if it's still circulating in your blood, that means your body wasn't using it. So I like the argument you're making, which is that you ran the debt up so badly, your body was so depleted and broken that you kept pouring massive amounts in and you still couldn't get back to what we would call an equilibrium, or that was the other thing I liked about the Fung book, the obesity book, was the whole first section was about homeostasis and
Yeah,
how critical it is to
yeah.
everything. And so I think if we, and then the other thing, feature wise, that you're making me think that would be really awesome for my app would be to do a risk assessment at the beginning. Now, I was already thinking about doing a risk assessment two-pronged. One risk assessment I wanted to do was what's your risk assessment of getting burned? Because there's so many people running around going, oh my God, if you go out in the sun, you're going to get skin cancer. And yet every dermatologist knows that you are going to get some sun exposure. They don't deny that. They just tell you slap on all this stuff as much as you can. But in fact, if you protect your skin completely all the time,
You're gonna
then
die
you get
sooner.
yeah, you get exposed. You put your arm up on the car and you're not thinking, you're going to burn faster
Yeah.
and you're going to get a worse burn. And
Well,
by the way,
I'm gonna have to go, but I want to talk to you more, and I'd love to communicate more with you, because you have a brain that's working in a very different way than mine. I've been challenged by the idea that I have all these clinical stories, but that medicine is not interested in those anymore. And yet, you have a way to open that door to use those clinical stories. So, I'd like to talk more about that. Can we make a date to do that? Not necessarily right
definitely,
now.
sure. And let's just do the same thing. Whatever date works for you. My schedule's pretty wide
Okay.
open.
Let me
I'll make the time.
get back to you, and we'll talk more about ways um, that I might be able to help you and you help me to get the clinical stories out there. And I'll give you more of kind of a dump of the way I think. I also want to send you a couple of PowerPoints that'll summarize the way I'm thinking really fast for you.
Sure. That'd be
Um,
great.
okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we could do together, ultimately, one of the ideas I had with DeMinder a while ago was to make it for building data sets.
I love
So
that idea because
nobody has to go out in the sun if they don't want to. If you run the risk of, by the way, I was at the Rose Bowl Aquatic Center a couple of weeks ago, and I saw this woman swimming, and with what looked like her father. She was a type 1 on the Fitzpatrick, and it was in the middle of the day, and little by little, her skin turned bright pink. I wanted to swim over there and tell her father, I mean, do you know what is going on right now? I mean, but anyway, what could be interesting with the data set stuff too is I don't know if you've looked at the lamps. I built support into the app for the Spurdy lamp. There's a new lamp out now called the Mitolux lamp that also does red light therapy. But for sure, everybody gets upset like, oh, I'm going to burn. Well, in fact, the type 2s and 3s are at some risk. A type 1, I would tell a type 1, do not go out in the sun.
Rob, let me tell you remind me to tell you about a couple of clinical events where people have changed their skin type by doing this right sleep program. That they can actually people who have never been able to build a tan, and I'll tell you, I have no idea how this works really, but I have a couple of other colleagues who think it has to do with iodine, and let me go down that path with you because it will blow your mind. People who've never been able to tan, you change things in their body that has to do with the microbiome, and all of a sudden they can tan now. That's
Well,
like,
you know that Gregor does have a video about that, and of course, his argument is that you have to eat a lot of plants. Then what happens is the phytonutrients in the plants. But of course, if you eat those plants, right? So if you
that's
eat those
fascinating
plants,
because
they're
that'll
not going to
change
get
your
anywhere into
microbiome
your skin
population.
if your microbiome isn't
Yeah.
working.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for contacting me. It's been my pleasure to talk to you. You're really smart and you have this really big view. I mean, you just are seeing so many stars all at the same time. It's really
I
cool.
totally enjoyed the whole conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right. It's good
Look
talking to
forward to
you.
the next one.
Me too.
Bye,
Bye
Stacia.
bye.